Hi everyone, we're going to talk about parallelograms today and how to find their area. So first thing you need to know is what is a parallelogram? Well, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral, which means it has four sides and two pairs of parallel opposite sides. So what do I mean by parallel? That means they go in the same direction and they would never touch. So these two sides are parallel. And we put a little V like that to show that. And these two sides are parallel. Basically, it looks like a rectangle, kind of if there was a hook pulling it. Because of that, squares are technically parallelograms because the opposite sides are parallel. Rectangles are also parallelograms. And then you had those slanted ones we talked about. These guys are not parallelograms because while these sides are parallel, these sides are not parallel. So that is not a parallelogram. Same thing here. The left and right are parallel, but the top and bottom are not. So it's not a parallelogram. And on this one, the top and bottom are parallel, but the left or right are not. So it's not a parallelogram. So what do we do with these parallelograms? Well, first we're going to try to figure out how we can tell if it is one or not. So take a second, find which one you think is the parallelogram, and it is this guy. Two sides, parallel sides of opposite. How do we find the dimensions of a parallelogram? Well, the first thing you need to know is that a parallelogram is actually a rectangle in disguise. I want you to picture cutting this little piece off of this parallelogram and moving it over here like they showed. You can see that a parallelogram actually has the same amount of squares in it as a rectangle would. So when we find the dimensions, what we're curious about is the base. This will be the base. And the height. The height has to make a right angle. We're not going to use the slant height. We're going to use a straight up and down height. Because how tall someone is, you would always measure straight down. You would never do it slanted. So for this particular parallelogram, the base would be 3 and the height would be 2. Okay, which rectangle can be made from a parallelogram that has a base of 2 and a height of 4? Well, which one of these has a base of 2 and a height of 4? That would be this guy right here. So Mandy cut a parallelogram and she made this rectangle. She then used the formula area is base times height to find the area of the rectangle. And she got 15 square units. Well, that makes sense because we're trying to count the number of squares. It will be easier to count the squares of a rectangle than this, so she just cut and moved it over. So what does that make the area of the parallelogram? Is the amount of squares inside this object the same as this one? Is this one bigger or less than? Well, if you're just moving this piece over here, there's still the same amount of blue stuff, so it is equal to. So that means the parallelogram has the same area as its, I'm going to call a rectangle friend. The rectangle that you can make out of it has the same area. So because of that, this formula, area equals base times height, which we use for rectangles, is actually the same formula for parallelograms. So the area of a parallelogram is also area equals base times height. Now you have to be careful to pick the height, has to make that right angle. So the area of this rectangle would be 10 for the base, 9 times the height, so it'd be 90, and we're going to say feet squared because we're still counting those little squares inside. How about this guy? What is the area of this parallelogram? Well, it's base, 3 times height, 4, which gives me 12 units squared. Use a figure to complete these statements. Okay, the base B of the parallelogram is how many feet? 16 feet. The height would be 10. So then how do you find the area? Base times height equals 160. And it has to be square feet, just like they said, or you can say feet squared. Now we're going to talk about graphing it. This is a nice grid. It's going by ones. I know that confused us a little bit the other day. So make sure your graph paper is how you like it. We're going to plot these points. -3, 4, left 3, up 4, 4, 4, 2, -1, and -5, -1. So it is a parallelogram. You can see, mine's kind of sloppy, but there you go. So they want to know the area. Well, area is base times height. So we need to figure out what this base is. You can count, or you can ask yourself, how far is -5 from 2? -5 to the 0 is 5. 2 more is 2, so that's 7. The base is 7. When you find the height, you don't do the slant. You find a spot from one base to the other base. So, how far is it from 4 to -1? You're welcome to count, but if you're up 4 and down 1, that's a total of 5 away. 7 times 5 is 35 units squared. Let's look at this guy. The base of the parallelogram is how many units? Well, is this the same problem I did? -5, and this guy is at 1. Now it's a little bit different. Well, I wrote a 5. So from -5 to 1, how far apart is that base? Well, I had to go 5 to 0, and then one more, so the whole base is 6. How tall is it? If you go straight down here, you can count it, or you went up 2, you went down 2, that's a total of 4. Base times height, 6 times 4, which is 24 square units. The picture shows a grassy plot of land in the middle of town. The town council plans to use the land for a new playground. They want to know what the area is. So this is a parallelogram, and area is base times height. But they have 3 sets of numbers here. Which one of these is the base? Well, the base will be here, the top or the bottom, which is 80. As for the height, I have 2 numbers I could look at. Remember, the height has to make a right angle, has to be straight up and down, so it's 80 times 100. This 110 is extra information. So that gives us 8,000 meters squared. Okay, let's talk about Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee wants to make a seating area in his backyard. He outlines a parallelogram-shaped area. Here's the drawing. Which one of these will find the area? Area is base times height, so we have to figure out which one is extra. I do not need this 11. That's what we call the slant height. So I just need 14 times 10, and my answer is B. A plot of land is divided into equal sections. Each section is a parallelogram with a base of 20 meters and a height of 50 meters. How many sections are there? Okay, so the picture looks wrong, doesn't it? This plot of land is divided into equal sections. Okay, so the area of this guy is 8,000. Each section is a parallelogram. So inside of here, there are other parallelograms. I didn't draw it very good, but inside of here is other parallelograms. And inside of it, each of those has a base of 20 and a height of 50. So what is the area of that? Well, the area of that guy is 20 times 50, which is 1,000. But the whole thing has 8,000. My little pieces have 1,000. So how many little pieces are there? I'm going to take 8,000, divide by 1,000, to figure out how many little pieces or sections there are, and there are 8 sections. Thought that was tricky because they didn't give you a nice little picture to figure it out. They just gave you the big picture. So I thought that one was tricky. Mr. Lee wants to make a seat in his backyard. Here we go. The drawing shows a dimension. What would the area of this guy be? It'll be base times height, 10 times 12 or 120 square feet. If he wants to cover it with tiles, and each tile is 4 square feet, how many tiles will he need? Well, the whole thing is 120 feet squared. So if I divide it by 4, that should tell me how many tiles I would need. 120 divided by 4 is 30. So that should give me 30 tiles. That's it for today. We will have time for homework help together.